things up to your imagination is a sinful fruit that the AAA titles are not willing to give you. But when it comes to indie side of stuff, the fruit is often there. Something that a lot of AAA games miss about empty maps and the sheer ambience that it has to offer is this. Games seeking to quote-unquote be alive will almost never feel alive because you don't have to imagine anything. And if you can't do that, then it loses its magic. Your brain automatically realizes that it is just some codes on the screen. Don't get me wrong though, the game will still have some sort of vibe to it, but it just won't be as interesting. Cry of Fear manages to capture that feeling of horror and the empty ambience, which mind you, don't have to be synonymous. These streets and alleys are either empty or filled with monsters. And the streets are sometimes empty when you are backtracking or whenever you've killed all of the monsters. And at times when the game is introducing you to a new area. And the moments where you have to backtrack are just gorgeous. Now, before we continue, I want to let you know that this video will not have any spoilers story-wise. With that said, we will be going over some of the liminal places that the game has to offer. Cry of Fear is a mod for Half-Life 1, first released on 22nd of February 2012. However, it became a standalone game back in 25th of April 2013. Although Cry of Fear's graphics is not good by today's standards, it is still very impressive how they were able to make a game like Cry of Fear with the Gold Source engine, which by the way is not the modern version of Source engine, meaning that they used the older versions of the Source engine to create an absolute masterpiece. Now, I'm sure a lot of us have been noticing this trend with modern media. More and more people are beginning to lean towards indie games that try to recreate PS1 graphics. And there are a lot of reasons to like older graphics. One of those reasons is that older games are nostalgic, but also because of how magical they looked due to their unrealism. There is a fine midpoint between a game like, let's say, Crash Bandicoot and a modern game like God of War that I feel like a lot of people are not talking about aesthetic wise. Now look, there are only so many mediums that one can get through during their lifetime on this earth, so bear with me in case you have a better example. Growing up, I remember playing this obscure game called Project IGI and IGI2 that my father had installed on our computer. It's a basic first-person shooter game with some integrated stealth mechanics. Will the next video be about IGI ? Well, maybe. Some of you might have played the older CSGO games, and IGI reminds me of those games quite a lot. And what I love about those games and Project IGI is how realistic, but at the same time unrealistic the graphics are. And the fact that you're seeing stuff from a first-person view helps reinforce certain feelings more, feelings that are hard to describe. Perhaps they are only hard to describe because they are a mixture of various different feelings. But I'm 100% sure that it's not only nostalgia, and sometimes you can't even call it liminal space, but those feelings come whenever you notice that the game is trying to recreate life in their games, but they partially fail to do so. I mean, look, I know that this is a stove and this is a mountain, but the longer you engage with these unrealistic versions of life, you can't help but to feel kind of confused. So your brain just wants to wander around the rest of this world, and that simply because of morbid curiosity. I've gotten these feelings quite a lot as a kid, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well, simply because we didn't know how to follow some goddamn objectives. Looking back at those experiences now, I really miss them. I miss thinking that there was a bigger world out there in games. So, why not explore the past a bit more and Cry of Fear? You wake up in an empty alley with nothing but a phone and a switchblade in your inventory. Your mom is starting to get worried and she wants you to come back home. As you walk into the various tunnels the Swedish city has to offer, a dark figure begins to lurk away from you. And right when you get away from the tunnel, you're met with a spooky jump scare. You see a blocked off tunnel, but no worries. There is a door that leads to another tunnel that you can navigate through. This introduction is one of my favorite introductions. The game doesn't give you a clear objective from here on out. It also gives you a weapon, but everything seems normal, so at the same time, abnormal. It looks like the time is only 8 PM, and yet almost nobody is in town. This is what makes the environment around you unique and ambient. You feel lonely, but also at the same time you know something is out there trying to get you. Now this is the part where horror and ambience become synonymous, and we're not going to explore that today, but rather how the design of the streets and buildings work together in order to create the feeling of liminal space. A lot of people know what liminal space is, but it's also overused. A feeling of loneliness doesn't automatically make something liminal. When the normal daily functions of a building or design are not functioning, that's when you can call it liminal. If a street is designed to at least have more than one human in it and it's not serving that purpose, that's when it becomes liminal. Also, usually when we hear the sound of a church bell, we don't think of the machine doing it, but rather an actual human, which makes exploring this part of the game even weirder. But a street is kinda big, and when you look deeper into stuff, some things stick out more than they usually do.
Babushka, was here? Which is Babushka?
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Your imagination begins to sparks more than any AAA game ever could. You know, that part has been in the script for days, and I don't think it's that insulting. You must wonder, what's beyond that white van? I'm sure a lot of us as kids try to answer the profound question of the invisible wall. It just makes you wonder, could there be someone behind that van just staring at you? It also makes you want to wonder if some invisible eye, some omnipotent eye is just looking at you without you ever knowing. That was the first stage of the mind state that I'm trying to interpret for you. But after that, so many other questions come to light when you go through the environment. Imagine if this was a real street design. The boss of whoever made this design would be fired, but in game, it looks oddly relaxing. I mean, nothing about it makes any sense. A tree being right next to a building's window with a street lamp next to it would look weird in real life, but in game, it looks fine. But at the same time, your brain doesn't know how to comprehend it. And the local shops, including the barber shop, gives me that feeling that I was talking about before. Is there somebody in that shop and watching my every action? The logical answer to that question would be no, but it's not really the thought that counts, but rather the emotion behind it. Back to the first mind state, why do these steps lead to nowhere? In terms of game progression, sure, it has a logical purpose, the purpose being the code for the computer, but still, it looks like it's leading to the window next to the main building, which again, doesn't hurt my eye in game, but in real life, that would make no sense. Also, right next to the aforementioned stairs, there is a bike, which makes you want to wonder who the hell is owning this bike and why is he or she not putting it on a bike rack instead of just placing it in the middle of the main square. And that's not the only bike either, which just fuels the feeling of eeriness even more. It's almost as if though everybody else in this world are just living their daily lives inside of their apartment. Speaking of apartments, the windows are incredibly small and yet they give off the feeling as if somebody could actually live in there. And that's not the only part. Look at these ceilings. It feels like people live in here, but also at the same time, you know that nobody could live in these buildings. This is where the imagination part comes in. Your brain tries to make an image of people that never existed. You begin to wonder what their lifestyles could be like. And mind you, these thoughts are incredibly vague and are almost always bound to come whenever you explore an empty space in a video game. And these feelings aren't expressed only in horror games.
They went up before they were on the floor. They're just looking at you.
You could as easily get the same feeling from a game like Spyro, because again, the game is trying to go for a feeling, but the execution is not realistic. And that's not to say that realism automatically makes a game better or worse, in terms of liminal space of course, but when it comes to that liminal feeling, worse is generally better. Gustav Dahl Park, or the park, is one of those area locations that you just want to stare at. Kinda reminds me of Silent Hill The Room, mainly the segment of the game where you have to explore the outskirts of Silent Hill. What I love about that game environment and this game environment in Cry of Fear is how there are cars in places where they shouldn't be. And best of all, the cars look perfectly functional. Yeah, sure, you can interact with them and the game will tell you that the interior is destroyed, but that's just an excuse to keep the story going. But still, it makes you want to wonder who owned this car. Did it just teleport here by mistake from another universe? And oh look, unrealistic apartments again. I absolutely love this experience. It's almost as if I'm deluding myself into thinking that somebody is watching me, but also at the same time I know damn well that's not the case. And really, this is partially what this whole video has been about. Human imagination has always been a lie, a sophisticated one for sure. Imagination and the hope of one day achieving something great by some rightful order and law has never been realistic, and that's why lies give life color. That's not to say color in a good way, by the way, but it makes consuming things easier. I mean, we are experiencing this feeling of life in a horror game, for God's sake. Anyways, excuse me for getting ahead of myself. Something else that you'll notice about this area is this strange building with two finished shell spaces. Once again, for the 15th time, in-game, this doesn't hurt your eye whatsoever. In fact, the whole game has just felt comforting even when you're killing monsters, although I mean it in a horror game sense. But when you look at it more and try to question the functionality of the place, that is when it becomes interesting. Now, if this is supposed to be a park, why are there, what it looks like to the untrained eye, two shops? The fact that the park is almost like a courtyard for the apartments makes the feeling even more prevalent. And the fact that there are walls and cars stopping you from interacting with them makes it even weirder. Now, at this point, the game is trying to tell you that everything is becoming chaotic. And from an outsider's perspective, that's mainly because of the story. But again, it doesn't stop that feeling from illuminating, because there are still so many things that are trying to replicate something that are a part of daily life. For example, what the hell is that? And also, remember when I was talking about the van? Yeah. The childish part of my brain is already beginning to fill in the blank here. Depending on how you look at it, this is both a critique and a praise. But it looks like the tree is growing out of concrete, which is just gorgeous because it looks like something an extraterrestrial would make for us humans. So you automatically realize that the environment is trying to be normal, but it's not. Also, one last thing that needs to be mentioned here. This might differ in each Swedish region, but why are there no fences around these ponds? This small segment of the park is just beautiful, but not in a good or bad way. It just looks attention grabbing in a very odd way. Now thinking about it, technically speaking, it's not inside of the park, but the exit. It doesn't necessarily look like an extraterrestrial's making, but at the same time, it looks like half of the building is underground and we can see white plastered walls, making it look like a construction site. But at the same time, you can see some calming similarities with real life, like how the street lamps illuminate the trees and the bushes. But since the graphics of the game is outdated, it just gives the environment that slight edge. Another weird detail about this place is how an abandoned building is right next to a seemingly functioning van, which wouldn't be a weird occurrence during daytime, but in nighttime though, it just feels more isolating. Mainly because there's a sign of life, but we the player can never see that. And whenever we do see it, it's mostly abnormal because, well, spooky child go scream.
But next at Freddy's, that's where I wanna be.
Have you ever wanted to explore an empty forest or some sewer system in the middle of the night, mainly because of the aforementioned feelings that I've been trying to describe? Well, if you do, you'd probably know that it could lead to some serious consequences. The second option is cool, but I'm not sure how legal it is. The thing that makes sewer tunnels interesting is that sewers will always be liminal, even in real life, because it doesn't even have the function of having a lot of people in them, which is where Cry of Fear really glows environment-wise. The devs take something that isn't usually supposed to be natural, and through some small details they make it even more unnatural. When going through the eerie tunnels, you notice some small details like Coca-Cola I mean Coca-Cola bottles. Now I know that sewers aren't that clean, but the Coca-Cola bottle is full. And you know how the rest plays out. You can't stop your mind from wondering who owns it, and so on and so forth. And also, these cardboards on the ground make me want to think that somebody slept here, which is not that eerie, mainly because there could be monsters living here. I mean, they were here before I started recording minutes ago. Yes, I did kill them before recording, but come on. It's for the YouTubes.
Hello guys, would you support me and sort of follow me on your YouTubes?
Something else that I would like to mention is the eerie ventilators. They look so unrealistic, it kinda reminds me of Silent Hill. In Silent Hill, most of the properties look realistic, but what makes them feel liminal, at least in my personal opinion, is the fact that they are placed in unrealistic environments, where they shouldn't be. But in this game, the placement is normal, but it looks like something that an extraterrestrial would make. An extraterrestrial that has never had any connections with humans and their architecture, but is still trying to recreate it. Yeah, this part was surprisingly short, but a part of me just really wanted to talk about it. All in all, Cry of Fear's empty environment is a result of various factors like limited graphics, weird property placement, and most importantly, amazing audio. This video could be 10 times longer, and even the feeling would be impossible to describe unless you experience it yourself. Although this video is anything but an analysis of the game's horror, this is partially why the game is horrifying to play, by the way. Like seriously, it can go from melancholic peace to total nightmare in seconds. The jump scares aside, the dreamlike feeling that the game has plays well into the psychological horror theme. So, let's be grateful for every second of game, even when we're not shooting NPCs or other players, to make the numbers go up. I know, it's kinda cringe.